Hey, welcome to the cLabs Pirate Radio. I am Anna Rose, here again, and this time I'm with two folks from the Graph, Simon and Nadar.
That's right.
Did I say it right?
Nadar.
Nadar.
Very close
Crap.
there.
Nadar. Nice to have you both here. Why don't we do a quick intro to both of you, and then we're going to jump into the Graph.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I'll go first. My name is Nadar, like you mentioned. I had a really great time today giving my presentation. First time working with Celo, so that's really cool. Or Celo, I'm not.
Celo's the network, cLabs the company.
Okay, got you. So
Both.
Yeah, I'm a developer relations engineer with the Graph. Been here, or with Edge and Node actually, but we work very closely with the Graph. I've been here for a little over 4 months. Kind of fairly new to the whole blockchain and Web3 space, but I'm like having probably the best time of my life as a developer. I have 10 years. So yeah, I'm really excited to be here at ECC.
Cool. What about you, Simon?
Yeah, my name is Simon. I'm a solutions engineer at Edge and Node, working alongside talented people like Nadar and others.
Nice.
And I discovered the Graph as I back in days working for Melon or Enzyme, as it solved a crucial problem for us, especially like the historical data retrieval from the blockchain. And since then I'm a fan, and now I'm honored to be part of the team.
Now you join the team.
Yes.
Let's dig into what the Graph is. You mentioned data, clearly has something to do with that. How would you describe the Graph?
The Graph is it is a decentralized network of subgraphs which in the end want to or will make all data made available, a query available, not just in a matter of seconds, so like milliseconds. So you can have a UI that displays complex data out of blockchains, IPFS, other networks like that in a second, so you can have snappy UIs. That's what it is.
When you say data, but you're saying like the data may live somewhere else. This is the query tool in a way. Maybe go into that. Like you just said IPFS, so maybe give us a journey of like a search and where the Graph lives in that.
One nice analogy is it's like a library, right? So the blockchain is like a library, and if you have multiple books down in the cellar and you are searching for a particular book, then if you do not have an index, you just go down the stairs and look at every book.
Yes, that's a really good analogy.
Book, right?
And that was the problem. Like if you need to just get a single item from the chain, it's not terribly hard to do. But if you want any query that has any type of like filtering, sorting, any type of like time, an array of like data based on time or any arguments or anything like that, it just wasn't possible. So a lot of times people were building out their own indexing servers, and they were breaking the whole idea of decentralization in the first place.
Because they were centralizing the indexer.
They were centralizing, exactly. So the
Okay.
data was no longer decentralized. Also, you're left with a single point of failure. Also, it's very resource intensive. Anytime you need something changed, you have to go in and build out all of that yourself. So a lot of those problems are solved by the Graph.
Cool. Let's hear a little bit about actually how does the Graph live on a blockchain? Does it live alone? Does it live? Because I've always sort of thought it was an Ethereum. Yes, to both.
No, it's a good question.
Okay,
It's the same thing that I was wondering myself when I started kind of diving into it. So it's a protocol. So the data itself is not on chain when you're actually querying it. Of course, it's coming from a chain. It could be Ethereum. It could be one of the other networks that are supported. But they are run by almost, you could think of it as like a number of contributors and people that are participating in the protocol with different incentives. So for instance, where does the data live exactly? Well, indexers basically are participants in the protocols, and they're running nodes, they're running decentralized nodes, they're running infrastructure themselves. And then the developers that want to deploy APIs on top of those indexers, they write the code that describes the data that the indexers want to serve. They deploy those, and then the indexers are starting to serve those queries. So you have multiple indexers serving maybe queries from a single subgraph. So you have not a single point of failure, but you have decentralized indexers.
Indexers, but they're not validators, are they? Do you kind of put them in a similar category to?
So when you say validation, you're thinking like data integrity and things like that.
Mistake. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I can explain the way that I kind of understand how the incentives work for data integrity and stuff. And it's kind of has a lot to do with some ideas that are in game theory and crypto economics and things like that, where you have this idea of slashing. So if someone serves data that is incorrect or improper, then they lose money from what the rewards that they would have otherwise gathered. So there's a lot of incentive for people to actually serve the right data, and anyone that doesn't do so is heavily penalized. So it's kind of like against anyone's best interests. So it's part of the protocol, though. It's kind of like programmatically built into the smart contracts and stuff.
It's like, it sounds like you've really tried to decentralize this indexer role, but I still don't understand, is it built in smart contracts on Ethereum? Does it have a standalone chain? Like, what is it?
The protocol, it's built on Ethereum.
It is built on Ethereum. But
yes, the protocol, it's governed by smart contracts that are living on Ethereum.
And for that, would it mean like if you're using those smart contracts, you're using it to index Ethereum? Would you have to redeploy the graph on other networks if you wanted to like also index Celo or
So right now, the
Polkadot?
only actual decentralized network that was launched actually just a couple of weeks ago is mainnet Ethereum.
Okay.
So we support a lot of other networks in the studio. And this is going to get into that whole conversation of like cross-chain and future things that we have coming down the road.
Totally.
But we have a lot of dApps that are not on mainnet that are using the graph. They're basically using a hosted service, which is a centralized service. And it was how the graph came to be by basically having a proof of concept and validating that. And then once that was validated, then they started moving to the decentralized network. And mainnet is the first network that's... So the answer to your question is I don't know yet, because like we haven't done that yet.
Cool. But this is great to hear. So like originally the proof of concept was more of like a centralized version of an indexer that everyone could use, and then now you're stepping into that.
Right,
like,
the API stays the same. It's now just decentralizing it because now the idea has been validated and people want to use it. So
I actually want to hear about this launch or this move, because I thought the graph had launched some time ago, but it sounds like this decentralization, this is happening now. So maybe tell me the status of the project and what's...
Yeah, you worked on a lot of the stuff for the launch.
A little bit more maybe, I know. No, I think like there was the one mainnet event that happened, everybody knew, was when the GRT token was distributed initially, right? That was in October, I think, 2020. And from then on, the network was thought through, and it was there already. There was a test net where we tested everything.
Like on the contracts were there.
Yeah,
and stuff,
the contracts, they were like fine-tuned, etc. Then, but I think 2 weeks, it's almost exactly 2 weeks ago, we launched the thing to the mainnet. Until then, it was not possible to deploy a subgraph in a decentralized manner. You could deploy a subgraph to our hosted service.
In this more centralized way.
Yeah, in the centralized way.
The decentralized remained on testnet, I guess, up until that point. Okay.
And now this is possible. So you can create your subgraph and deploy it on the mainnet and do the whole game theory behind it. Like you can signal for a subgraph to say, to indicate its high quality. You could have staked, you could have delegated to Indexer since October or November. But now you can actually signal a subgraph which says like this subgraph is high quality, and so the indexers pick those high quality subgraph, index them, and serve them.
I wonder, I'm sure you've done this, but I think for viewers and listeners, how would an app use it exactly? So now you're on mainnet. I want to kind of understand what kind of, you sort of said there's lots of types of data, but what would an example of a project using the graph look like? Yeah,
I mean, there's a million examples out there. So think about let's just say a popular app that people are probably familiar with, Twitter, right? So if you wanted to build Twitter right now on a blockchain, and you wanted to say when your app loads right now, what do you typically see? You see a feed of queries, you see a feed of tweets, and these tweets aren't just all from a single person. They're not from a single time. They're actually just a very wide array of things. So you might see a tweet from someone you follow. It might be a suggested tweet, and then you might see a tweet from a week ago. So where does that data come from? Well, if you tried to query that directly from the chain, imagine trying to kind of go through each individual transaction and understand the data there, and then aggregate that and bring it together. It's basically impossible. And if you did try to do that, it would the query would take hours or days. So again, it comes down to what he was talking about earlier, indexers, an indexing layer that typically is the compute or the database layer in Web 2. It isn't there for Web 3. So when you want to build something like Twitter and you have a subgraph deployed, you can have different types of data access patterns. So I might say, give me all of the tweets that have this word in them, and then that query will return the results, because all that data has been basically saved into a database, running on an indexer. We have this API layer, and it's all coming back.
Cool. And it sounds like this is one of these key building blocks that has been
It
somewhat
is, yes.
missing.
It is.
I want to now bring it to the topic that we're talking about primarily today, which is like interoperability and cross-chain. And so I'd asked you just before this interview if like, do you have bridges? But like maybe it doesn't really make sense in this context. So yeah,
Yes.
give me a sense though of how this interoperability play may look for the graph.
Yeah, do you want to go first? Or, I mean,
Yeah, I mean, the graph is blockchain agnostic in its design.
Yeah.
The Ethereum mainnet is just like, and we believe in it, but it is the first step. And if and we already integrated with the EVM compatible chains, like different ones, like Polygon, Binance, whatever EVM compatible chains are there. Yes, Celo, obviously.
Yeah.
It's also EVM compatible, sorry. And this is already possible, although not on the decentralized network, currently on the hosted service only.
I see.
Although there are plans to move forward there fast, so expect news for this soon. And then already announced our integrations with Near, Solana, Polkadot. The thing there is we need to refactor the graph node a bit and integrate with that networks especially.
Yeah.
But that's already ongoing.
How would that happen though? Because if you're like Solidity-based smart contracts right now, and then you wanted to redeploy, I guess you'd redeploy it on these networks, but they're like sometimes written in Rust or something else. Do you have to rewrite?
We don't need to deploy every smart contract on every chain. It's
see.
the only contracts. Like I'm not deep involved in
Okay,
this, but
Don't hold you to it.
roughly speaking, the only contracts that we need to deploy on these chains are the contracts that prove the indexing. There we need to be on that particular chain. But then the next step we can do with a bridge back to Ethereum.
Cool.
interesting. I just learned something.
That's what I know for now. But as I said, I'm not part of that.
This does sound like future too. And I want to ask, is there anything else that's like very future focused? What are you looking at? What do you?
I mean, in the spirit of the conversation of like cross-chain, I mean, the ultimate vision is to be able to have like a single API endpoint that people can deploy that returns data from all types of different networks and blockchains in a single query. So you might index data from like these 3 chains, and you kind of combine them into a single piece of data that's returned from some type of API call. So like the whole idea there would be you are able to interop, and you're able to kind of build out not only transactions from your client to all these chains, but also queries returning the data back from them. So I think that's kind of the ultimate vision, and I think that's what the founders are super excited about and very motivated by.
That's very exciting. That idea is like you could then start using like some sort of data, some qualities on different networks for some like meta maybe app or something like that. But all of a sudden I'm thinking like how, I don't know if it would work with this like I always think of like these liquidity AMM type things, but yeah, this would be this actually does
because
open
like
up
the
some cool
vision
use
of like
cases.
Web3 is all of this data is there, and people can use them for building blocks. And this is kind of like you could think of as a system for organizing those blocks together and kind of giving people ways to organize them.
So I have one last question, and I don't know if this is something you're even thinking about, but I have a podcast called the Zero Knowledge Podcast. It tends to look at like privacy and blockchain often. Do you have any thoughts? Like, does the team have any thoughts on like privacy in this context? Right now, what you're talking about is data. Like, you're looking for data. So yeah, I'm curious. I mean, I don't know if it's even and if it isn't, no worries.
No, identity and these things are things that I personally, coming from like a Web 2 background into this space, I'm really interested in, because it's hard for me to wrap my head around the differences and the trade-offs there. Because when I store data, I'm often thinking about authorization scenarios where you kind of like only want certain people to access certain things. And some of the applications that I've been focusing on and understanding as someone that's kind of getting into this space have been around public data. So I don't have a lot of understanding where I would store something that needs to be private personally at this point. I know that there are projects out there that kind of deal with those sort of things, but I don't know a lot. Maybe you know a little bit more.
I mean, what the graph does is indexing public data.
It's mostly
Yeah.
public.
Yeah, exactly.
It's always
Alwa-
public.
always
There is
public.
there is no authorization. Although you can say you can hide private data in public when you encrypt it.
Yeah.
So that's a strategy that you could also apply on data indexed by the graph.
Cool.
But so far, I cannot think about the project that actually does it. But theoretically, it's
Yeah,
possible.
yeah, theoretically.
It may even be worth like a future podcast where
Yeah.
we dig into like what privacy would mean in this context.
Yeah.
That would be interesting for sure.
But thanks so much for coming on. Yeah, and good luck with the graph.
Yes.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
Thanks.